Justice doesn't always emerge radiant in the light. Sometimes it must carve its place amidst darkness and doubt. The courtroom was a crucible, its air thick with the weight of unspoken judgments. The scent of polished mahogany mingled with the faint musk of old paper, a sensory tapestry that wrapped around the room's occupants like a shroud. High above, the ceiling stretched into shadows, its ornate moldings a silent testament to a justice system that prided itself on grandeur yet often faltered in fairness. The tension was a living thing, taut as a wire stretched to its limit, ready to snap with the slightest provocation. Every gaze, some wide with curiosity, others narrowed in disdain, converged on the slender figure standing before the bar. She was no imposing silhouette clad in robes of authority. She was Alina Ward, 17 years old, her navy high school blazers lightly wrinkled from the morning's rush, her white shirt crisp but unadorned, her skirt brushing her knees with quiet modesty. Her dark hair hung in a simple ponytail, swaying faintly as she shifted her weight, her brown eyes locked forward with a clarity that cut through the room's haze. The crystal chandeliers overhead spilled fractured light across the chamber, their glow dancing in the cold, unyielding eyes of Judge Gregory Langston. He sat enthroned on his elevated bench, a man carved from granite, his sharp features and thinning hair framing a face that radiated arrogance. Known across Boston for his iron rulings and a temper that brooked no defiance, Langston was a figure both feared and revered. His thin lips twitched as he surveyed the scene below, his gaze lingering on Alina with a mixture of incredulity and contempt. She stood not as a defendant pleading for mercy, nor as a witness reciting rehearsed truths, but in the audacious role of defense attorney, a position that seemed laughable to the murmuring crowd packed into the pews behind her. Whispers slithered through the rows like a restless wind. "A girl?" they hissed. "A child playing lawyer?" The skepticism was a tangible force pressing against Alina's back, but she stood unbowed. Before her was Evelyn Moore, the woman whose fate she had tethered to her own. A single mother with hollowed cheeks and hands that trembled as they gripped the table's edge. Evelyn's dark hair was streaked with premature gray, her eyes carrying the weariness of too many sleepless nights. She wore a faded sweater and jeans, her only armor against the storm of legal proceedings threatening to strip her of her home. A modest apartment in a crumbling Boston tenement where she raised her 6-year-old daughter, Lily. The charge against her was cold and technical, illegal occupation of property, a weapon wielded by the powerful to cast the powerless into the streets. Across the room stood Thomas Beckett, the prosecutor, a man whose presence filled the space like a shadow. His suit was a masterpiece of tailoring, his graying hair swept back with meticulous care, his voice a deep, polished rumble that commanded attention. At 48, Beckett had built a career on dismantling defenses with surgical precision, his reputation as unassailable as the law he wielded. He cast a fleeting glance at Alina, his lips curling in faint amusement, as if she were a child who had wandered into a lion's den with a stick for a sword. Judge Langston's voice sliced through the murmurs, sharp and deliberate. Counselor Ward, heightened, his tone dripping with mockery that stung the air like venom. "Are you certain you're qualified to represent the defendant? This is a courtroom, not some high school debate stage." A ripple of stifled laughter broke from Beckett's side, brittle and cutting, bouncing off the walls like shards of glass. Alina didn't waver. She drew herself up, her shoulders squared, her hands steady at her sides. She lifted her chin, meeting Langston's piercing stare with eyes that burned quietly but fiercely. "Your Honor," she said, her voice ringing clear and unshaken, slicing through the tension like a blade through fog. "I don't need anyone to affirm my qualifications, for justice always belongs to what is right." The courtroom fell into a stunned hush, the air itself seeming to pause. Her words hung there, a bold proclamation that shifted the room's axis. The whispers died, the laughter choked off, and even Langston's smirk flickered, a crack in his stony facade. In that frozen moment, the truth crystallized. This was no ordinary girl. This was a force, an attorney not born of wealth or lineage, but shaped by a fire that refused to be extinguished. Alina Ward had never dreamed of standing in such a place. She was a product of Boston's forgotten corners, raised in a sagging apartment building where the walls wept with damp and the floors groaned under every step. Her world had been small but vivid. The hum of her grandmother's sewing machine late into the night, the clang of pots as they cooked meals, stretched thin to feed them both, the distant wail of sirens threading through the city's pulse. Her grandmother, Alina Ward, was a woman of wiry strength, her hands calloused from decades in textile factories, her voice rough but warm. She'd raised Alina alone after her parents, lost to a car accident when Alina was barely 3, left her with nothing but a faded photo and a name. Eleanor had been Alina's compass. "The law's a beast," she'd told her one winter night, the two of them huddled under a threadbare blanket as snow tapped against the window. "It's got teeth, and it bites hardest at those who can't bite back. You want justice, girl? You'll have to wrestle it from the beast's jaws." Those words had lodged in Alina's chest, a seed planted in soil she didn't yet know was fertile. She'd grown up quiet, studious, her nose buried in library books, borrowed copies of Dickens, Orwell, and later, legal texts she barely understood but devoured anyway. She'd never sought to be a hero. She'd wanted only to survive, to carve out a life that didn't bend beneath the weight of poverty. But Evelyn Moore's case had shattered that quiet resolve. Alina had met her months earlier at a community food drive, a gray Sunday where the air smelled of wet asphalt and stale coffee. Evelyn had stood in line with Lily clinging to her leg, her smile faint but genuine as she thanked Alina for a bag of canned goods. That image, Evelyn's tired eyes, Lily's small hand, had haunted Alina when she overheard a neighbor mention the eviction notice weeks later. She'd gone to Evelyn's building uninvited, climbing the rickety stairs to knock on a door patched with duct tape. Inside, she'd found chaos, eviction papers strewn across a wobbly table, Lily coloring in a corner, Evelyn pacing with a phone pressed to her ear, her voice breaking as she begged for time. "I've paid every cent I could," Evelyn had whispered, sinking into a chair. "Calloway raised Therent 3 times in 2 years. I couldn't keep up. Now he says the lease is done, but I swear I signed for 5 years with renewals." Her hands shook as she pushed a crumpled contract toward Alina. "He's taking everything." That night, Alina couldn't sleep. She saw her grandmother in Evelyn's despair, saw herself in Lily's wide, uncertain eyes. She thought of the landlord, Richard Calloway, a man whose name appeared in glossy real estate ads, his wealth built on the backs of tenants like Evelyn. The seed Eleanor had planted years ago sprouted then, its roots twisting through Alina's core. She couldn't walk away. After the first hearing, Alina turned her bedroom into a battlefield. Her desk, a thrift store find with chipped edges, disappeared under stacks of legal documents, leases, court filings, notes scrawled in frantic bursts. The single bulb overhead buzzed like a trapped insect, casting harsh light across her work as she pored over every page. Rain battered the window, a steady drumbeat that matched the pounding of her heart. She traced Calloway's history through public records. A man in his 50s, sharp-featured and perpetually sneering, his empire spanning dozens of properties. He was no petty slumlord. He was a predator, his greed cloaked in the legitimacy of contracts and corporate titles. Then, in the small hours of a stormy night, she found it. Buried in Evelyn's lease was a clause, small print, easy to miss. The tenant could renew after 5 years with written notice. Yet Calloway's court submission declared the lease terminal, a bold date stamped over the original terms. The edit was masterful, nearly invisible, but Alina's eyes caught a faint smudge, a whisper of ink where the truth had been erased. She leaned closer, her breath hitching. This was no clerical error. It was fraud, deliberate and calculated. She scribbled a letter to Calloway that night, her pen digging into the paper. Cease the eviction, honor the original terms, or face exposure. She mailed it at dawn, her hands trembling with a mix of fear and exhilaration. Days stretched into a week with no response, until Evelyn called, her voice jagged with panic. A new eviction notice had arrived, stamped with the court's red seal, a defiant middle finger to Alina's demand. Calloway wasn't retreating. He was advancing. The second hearing dawned under a sky bruised with storm clouds, the wind rattling Boston streets. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere crackled, charged with a new ferocity. Calloway had upped the stakes, enlisting Charles Whitmore, a legal titan whose name echoed through law firms like a warning bell. Whitmore entered with the grace of a panther, his silver hair gleaming under the chandeliers, his bespoke suit a stark contrast to Alina's school uniform. At 60, he carried the gravitas of a man who'd crushed countless foes, not through brilliance alone, but through a ruthless mastery of the system's shadows. Calloway's escalation didn't end with Whitmore. In the weeks before the hearing, Alina faced a relentless assault. Evidence she'd filed, photocopies of the original lease, vanished from the clerk's office, replaced by vague excuses about misplacement. Witnesses she'd painstakingly gathered, neighbors who'd seen Calloway's agents pound on Evelyn's door, retracted their statements, their voices quavering with fear or bribery. Local papers ran hit pieces, their headlines screaming, "Single mother exploits loopholes to steal property." The articles painted Evelyn as a grifter, Lily a prop in her scheme, and Alina a naive meddler. Then came the threats. They started as midnight calls, the phone jarring Alina from fitful sleep. Silence hung on the line, thick and oppressive, before a voice rasped, "Know your place, girl, back off." She'd hang up, her pulse racing, only to lie awake staring at the ceiling. One night, leaving the law library with a stack of books, she spotted a black sedan idling across the street. It trailed her through the drizzle, its headlights slicing the dark, until she ducked into an alley, and it sped away. Her stomach twisted, but she clenched her fists and kept moving. Her grandmother saw the strain etching itself into Alina's face. One evening, as Alina hunched over her desk, Eleanor shuffled in with a mug of tea, her steps slow but deliberate. "You're killing yourself over this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You're 17, Alina. This ain't your fight. Let someone else carry it." Alina looked up, her eyes shadowed but unyielding. "Gran, if I don't fight, who will? Evelyn's got no one. Lily's got no one. Calloway's not just taking their home, he's taking their lives. And he'll keep doing it to others unless someone stops him." She offered a faint, stubborn smile. "I'm not backing down." She didn't. She tracked down a notarized copy of the original lease in the city's records office, a faded file buried in a basement archive, its edges curling, but its terms clear. It was her trump card, proof of Calloway's lie. She held it like a talisman, her resolve hardening. The courtroom hummed as the second hearing began. Whitmore opened with a flourish, presenting Calloway's valid contract like a sacred text, his voice smooth and authoritative. "The defendant's claims are a fantasy," he said, flicking a dismissive glance at Alina. "A desperate grab at what she's no right to." Alina waited, her breath steady. When her moment came, she stepped forward, placing the notarized lease before Judge Langston. "Your Honor," she said, her voice cutting through the room, "this is the original contract notarized 3 years ago, and this," she slid the forged version beside it, "is proof the plaintiff tampered with it." The room froze. Whitmore's polish cracked, his eyes narrowing. Calloway shifted, his face draining of color. Alina pressed her advantage, her tone rising with controlled fire. "This isn't tone mistake. It's a pattern, a man who rewrites truth to feed his greed." Langston studied the documents, his brow creasing as the smudge and altered clause glared back at him. Whitmore leapt up, his objection sharp, but the judge waved him down. "Let her speak," he growled, intrigued despite himself. Alina didn't hesitate. She'd uncovered more than the lease in her sleepless nights. Emails, tax records, a trail of deceit that stretched beyond Evelyn. "Calloway's no mere landlord," she said, laying a thick stack of files before the judge. "These are his tax reports. 5 years of lies, underreported income to dodge taxes. These emails show him plotting to coerce tenants, tossilence them. She tapped the papers, her voice steady but fierce. This is fraud, Your Honor, systematic and shameless. Gasps rippled through the room. Evelyn stared at Alina, tears welling. Whitmore's objections grew shrill, but the evidence was a flood he couldn't dam. Calloway sat rigid, his knuckles white, his empire teetering. Langston pored over the files, his face darkening. He fixed Calloway with a stare like ice. "Explain this, Mr. Calloway." Silence. Whitmore floundered, but the truth was inescapable. After a deliberation that stretched like a taut wire, the gavel fell. "This court rules for the defendant, Evelyn Moore," Langston declared. "The eviction is void. Richard Calloway will face investigation for fraud." The room erupted. Evelyn sobbed, clutching Alina in a fierce embrace. Cheers thundered from the pews, a tidal wave of triumph. Alina exhaled, the burden lifting, but Calloway's venomous glare across the room anchored her back to reality. That night, the city glittered under a cool, damp sky. As Alina left the courthouse, her phone buzzed. She read the text, her blood chilling. "You think you've won? Don't delude yourself. Watch your back." She scanned the shadows, half expecting that sedan to slink from the dark. Calloway wasn't alone. He was a thread in a larger tapestry, and she'd just tugged it loose. The next day, she stood outside Evelyn's building, watching Lily chase a stray cat while Evelyn unpacked. The dawn painted the sky purple, but Alina's mind churned. She rented a tiny office, a dingy room with a single window, and hung a sign. Justice Defense Organization. It was a start. Days later, a letter slipped under her door. A whistleblower's plea about a corruption ring dwarfing Calloway's crimes. Alina gripped it, staring out at Boston's sprawl. Darkness still cloaked countless lives, but she wouldn't stop. Justice was a journey, and hers was just beginning.